Ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages, it is a Thursday. It is the Mattriarchy. I am your host, Matt Reese, coming to you from Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, in case you wondered. And with me is, of course, Mr. Cummings himself, who is going to talk today about Frederick Wortham, the fine, upstanding gentleman that he was. Thanks for coming back again, Cap. Last time you're on, you had just started digging into Seduction of the Innocent, and in the meantime had scoured, if I may use the word, the Senate hearings about comic books and its effect on violent children. And I want to talk about that. But for those people who tune in, who may have missed last show, give us a quick rundown of who Frederick Wortham was and why we should care.
Well, Frederick Wortham was a psychiatrist or psychologist that was German-born, moved to America before the Nazis. Was very concerned, I think, about the Nazis as well, and felt like America might go towards the fascist path. He hated racism, and his argument was used to end segregation in Brown versus the Board of Education. My paper in particular was looking directly at the Senate hearings and the arguments that both Frederick Wortham and Loretta Bender, who was also a colleague, they both worked at Bellevue together while Frederick Wortham worked at Bellevue with her. And then he started a free hospital in Harlem. In the hospital, I can't remember the hospital off my top of my head, but it provided free or cheap care. It was like 25 cents. So cheap care for veterans and children, predominantly because it's Harlem, black children.
So with that, for the price of a couple of comics, you could go and have a session with a psychologist.
Yeah, and they would waive the fee, of course, if you could not provide. He felt that he had a lot of very basic ideas. Like if you're paying for something, you feel like you're getting a service. He felt if he didn't charge, if it was free, people wouldn't show up.
Which I think, especially in this, I think that was a real factor in this time right around the end of the Great Depression, when people started having access to these things again. Even the public works projects that were going on, people were getting paid a pittance for their amount of physical labor they were doing, and in some cases they were just doing busy work. But with that, it gave people an investment in what was going on, and I think that his reasoning is sound in that. And so being involved in these poor communities, how did he get involved in the question of comic books?
So a lot of these children, they fell into juvenile delinquency. At this point in time, America was starting to take better records of crimes and marriage and just overall governmental bureaucracy stuff. And so a lot of that stuff just sharply increased. And so this was immediately after the war, World War II, for people that are not clear. This is like the 1940s, 1950s. And so a lot of parents or a lot of fathers were killed during the war, and people were very concerned that these fatherless children were going to grow up on the wrong path. And that was Frederick Wortham. So he had a lot of these kids. And so he looked at the common denominator between them. And 95% of kids read comic books. So essentially that's what his conclusion was.
And it's interesting the time frame in all of that too, because I don't know if you're into old movies or not, but as a Mystery Science fan, I like them.
No, I don't really like them that much. I appreciate the historical value, but I look at them and I'm I just want to watch something else. I like 1970s movies because I think that's the cusp of creativity and still you're getting into the standard film now, like we have nowadays.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's definitely something to say for that. But in the 50s, there was just a huge spate of teen crime movies. It was a whole genre of these moral plays that were said, don't be a bad kid, kids. Look what happens to bad kids. And whether it was Ed Wood or whoever, there's gobs of these teen crime films that are quite funny in retrospect. But I can see that, looking at it at the time, where Wortham was immersed in real life crime, immersed in real life poverty, immersed in real life orphans, and kids with maladaptive and growing environments. And he's looking for answers, because that was a theme in the country. That was part of the zeitgeist of the 50s.
Mm-hmm. And he's not the only. That's the thing is, I think our time period where we have video games and movies and Netflix and just all this media in our face, we literally had nothing besides films and magazines and radio. That's a completely different world. If we were put into there, we would be completely bored, I think. But
or you could read more comics.
Yeah, you just read more comics. You wouldn't play video games. But so the thing to realize is there was tons of different groups. Like the Catholic Church had a huge group that was trying to convince people not to buy these bad books, and all sorts of different people other than just Frederick Wortham. I think what's interesting about him though is he didn't people wanted to build like a coalition with him, and he wanted to be his own man and represent it on his own.
That's a really interesting idea too. The idea that it seems, if I might guess, and tell me if I seem off base on this, more about the idea than about the coalition, right? Just don't worry about who I'm friends with, but do my ideas make sense on their own?
Well, he seemed like somebody that wanted to do the correct thing, even if it wasn't the popular thing, if that makes sense. So I'd have to go back to my notes and look up who these people's names are, but there was two people that sold nuclear secrets to the Russians in the late 40s, early 50s. And so they got the death penalty. And while they were waiting, they both got put into the same prison. The male was put, with everybody else, but the female was put in solitary confinement. And he was really angry about that and felt like it was, not the right thing. Like it was over and beyond what a punishment should be, since you're going to be killing her. And he fought to have that changed. And so he took a lot of flack because he's helping communists here.
Yeah, but it wasn't about the communism. It was about just treating her like a human before we end her. That makes sense. That makes sense. The more you talk about this guy, the more interesting a fellow he is. Like the complexity of his ideas. And although I don't necessarily agree with some of his takes, and one of the fun things, and we talked about this on the last show, and I know I can't remember the name of the channel you were on with that Canadian fellow talking about Wortham too, but just the idea that he gets such flack from the comic mainstream idea because of some of his whacked out, because I think some of his assumptions are pretty crazy, right? Like his insinuation that there's some sort of mandatory weird sexual tension between Batman and Robin, and then the Golden Age books, that's just not there,
Well, and that came from some of the children and interviewing those children. So it didn't come from like anything that's baseless. Maybe I'll send you I have the article. I'll send it to you. But yeah, that's weird. But
yeah, well, I see, and that is really, I'm intrigued more about that, because that may say more about the trauma these kids have gone through than it had to do about the reading material.
Because he dealt with a lot of kids that came from the system. And his basic argument is we need to help these kids, even though, they're a small section of people.
Right.
And, his basic take was we need to not sell comic books to kids that are younger than this age because they're too impressionable. And so if parents want to then give it to them, they can buy them and give it to them themselves.
And that's one of the things that I find really interesting is the idea that it wasn't about, because that's the picture that's painted is, like I put in the Twitter post, did Frederick Wortham want to take your comics from you? No. he just thought that parents should be
very mad at the creation of the Comics Code Authority.
Yeah. And he was upset about that. And that's one of the things that I think is also really interesting too, because, part of the narrative is that they created the Comics Code Authority to keep the government out of the thing. So the Comics Code saved comics from the government, but the Comics Code Authority is evil. So we have to get rid of it. So those are competing ideas. They don't really make sense together. And I think that's one of the things that's really, Mike, I just had a coffee delivery from off screen.
There's this really interesting quote that he makes. I'm going to be doing a piece during the Corona Kings.
Okay.
And it's going to deal with a section where I tell people to read, Seduction of the Innocent, because he really teaches you how to take a logical argument and then apply it with an anecdotal example, because that's all that he does. So it's very good to read his stuff, and he presents it in such an easy to, take manner, and then you can apply that to your own sort of experiences when you make arguments as well, is basically what I'm saying. He makes an argument though where, let me find it real quick. Here it is. So he says, comic books are the history's most notorious villain because, no, that's not the quote. Here it is. Here's what he says. This is very good because it's so provocative. And I'll explain it here in a minute because it sounds really silly nowadays. We're so distant from World War II. You could put yourself in 1954. We just got out of World War II. Your parents have died, fighting the Nazis. He goes, I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry. And then he goes on to say, they get children much younger. They teach them race hatred at the age of 4 before they can even read. Because his idea was kids, a lot of the times, learn the bad words before they learn the good words. And so when they're flipping through these books and they have like bigotry in it, they go, oh, this book's about, being a bigot. That's what they get from it. That's what his point was, that some of these kids don't know how to read very well, and so they're getting the bad stuff from the books.
And I can see like an argument about that. I just don't agree with it. But I do think that I'm sorry, go ahead.
But the interesting thing was, it sounds silly because you say Hitler. But his logic makes sense. I made this in my paper. His logic makes sense because you heard the part about the age 4. He's correct because the Nazis had the Hitler Youth, which you had to be like 14 years old to join or something like that.
Yep.
And so he's right on the money there. And then I go on to make the point about, I make the point that people misquote the Bible all the time. And the example I use is the rich trying to get into heaven, and it's like a camel trying to go through the eye of the needle. They usually fixate completely on that one line and then forget to go to the later verse, which says you got to believe in Jesus Christ to make it into heaven because we're sinners. And then I basically ended off with, people misinterpret stories all the time and get very bad ideas from it. So he has a point, but the better point is you got to argue better arguments.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that he really gets to is the idea of indoctrination. And one of the things that I want to bring up before getting on to the next phase you talked about in the last time you were on was that a big portion of his work was about false advertising and deceptive advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that companies are basically lying to their customers to get them to spend money. And that still happens.
Yeah, I read a whole. My professor had me read. I read 4 of the chapters. I read the first 2 to kind of get the gist of what's going on, and then I read the chapter about children, obviously, and then I read the final 2 chapters about morality and then the ethics of it. And it's a book about marketing in the 1950s, and it's all the type of consumerism stuff that you later see become like pushed on in a hyperactive way in the 1980s and then even today.
And the funny thing about too is the Better Business Bureau, which is a voluntary organization that polices consumer goods, was created in the 50s
Mm-hmm.
specifically to offset the fact that marketing was getting slick enough to trick people on such a big scale because mass media had become a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, mass media started happening in the 20s, radio and stuff kicking off, but when you had television enter people's homes in the was 52, it was a whole other ball game. It was off to the races as far as that goes.
And this book's called The Hidden Persuaders, and it's written by Vance Packard. You can find a PDF of it online and read it for free, so it's not like a hard to find book.
So so that's one of the things that's so interesting too about his mindset, is that his feeling was that comics were bad advertising for youth. And I think there are probably some people that would agree with that too. I mean, the part of the whole.
I don't know if you know about these examples, but there's examples. He was saying that there's this the crime books. They would teach you how to do crimes, and then you could buy an actual pistol or a rifle in the books back then.
That's true. That's
or
true.
Knife, or just all kinds of different things. He said with women there was like push-up bras and all kinds of creams, and he went into like the workout, the buff, the big buff guys in the magazine.
Charles Atlas, King of the Beach.
Yeah. So he was saying, he was talking about this whole like expectations of body, even back then. And I think it's something that's like, I see his point. And I do think it's kind of troublesome at teenagers in particular, because they have their huge image problems as teenagers. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think that there's something about the nature of the ideal, right? Mm-hmm. And that was even in the online comics critique community a few years back. The whole debate about Squirrel Girl, is this a positive role model for young girls, right? Because it's encouraging, these anti-Western concepts of quality and people getting them together not because they're all girls instead of getting along together because they have similar interests and value structure and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's just a reflection of, in many ways, of Wortham's arguments without wanting to admit it. I think that's I think that I think you can have intelligent debates about that thing. And I think that, you look at Wortham's later engagement of the fanzine community is part of his desire to have those kind of conversations. But at the same time, it's one of those things that, for him, 8-year-olds, 4-year-olds don't belong in that conversation. This is the conversation for grown-ups. and for me, I think the sooner you can start having those conversations, the better off, your kids are when they're, and as a homeschool dad, I'm biased, right? We've been poking my kids to talk about, so what do you think the Lord of the Rings is about? Since they were tiny, Yeah. But that's I'm also not a psychologist from a major, city.
Yeah,
with all
he
sorts of stuff.
studied at John Hopkins, worked at, I think he even taught at Harvard, maybe. So he's not like he's probably a kook, but he's not. But
He may be
you know what I'm
kook,
saying? Like
not a quack.
Oh, quack. Yeah, that's the better word. But
So
I lost my train of thought. Where were we at?
I was going to go ahead and say, okay, so he wrote The Seduction of the Innocent, got a little bit of popularity for it, but I would say that his lasting, or at least part of his lasting heritage, so to speak, within comics, came not just from that book, but from the fact that he was invited to speak before the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the stuff that I find is most interesting in the stuff that you uncovered, that we've talked about behind the scenes, is that once again, the impression that I got, when I first got into comics and started hearing about Wortham, was that it was the Wortham show, that he came in there and just had the whole thing. And there was the big debate between him and the fellow, or not debate between, but one of the big sides of the argument is the EC Comics guy,
Mm-hmm.
Gaines.
Right? William Gaines.
William
who
Gaines.
has a really interesting backstory too. His father, accredited to basically creating the form of comic book that we have today. He started doing Christian comics, and it was a failure. He wasn't making any money, but he died in a boating accident, and William Gaines didn't want to have anything to do with comics. And what's weird about this is he's anti-religious, he's an atheist. And, that's why they changed it to entertaining comics. And that's why they started doing science fiction and horror.
And so of course he spoke before the thing, but the other person, or another person who was notable at the hearing was Bender was her name, right?
Yeah, her name's Loretta Bender. There was more people, but since she was a psychiatrist, just like Wortham, I decided to totally, work off them too, because I think I took it as, and they really do fit into this, like the idea of Plato, and then you have Aristotle.
So talk about that a little bit, because that sounds like a fun comparison. I want to hear more.
Okay, so Loretta Bender works for DC Comics. She worked for the advisory board, and they would ask her questions. What do you think about this in terms of scaring children, or would they enjoy this? She's the expert, the children's expert. And hers was a little bit different than like juvenile delinquency. She worked with kids that had like very deep mental problems, and they would have fits and stuff like that. She was very concerned, again, to go back to World War II, with parents or children that didn't have father figures, that died during the war. So she felt that when kids have these bad problems in life, that action and adventure and stories can help distance them from that pain and give them some soothing relaxation while they're enjoying it. So it's like catharsis, the Aristotle idea.
Okay.
And and so you flip it over to, real quick, back to Wortham, and like we were just talking about, he has like the philosopher king is usually like somebody that you're going to raise to be the king, but he extends that out to everybody. Only give people good things, and then they'll grow up to be good people. So you got the Plato versus the Aristotle. And I think my opinion is, when you lay out their ideas, they both work without contradicting one another. Now, when you line them out that easily, it sounds like they contradict one another. But when you take their actual like ideas about everything, they don't contradict one another. And it's sort of the thing where you, as a parent, in my opinion, based off these, have to interpret your child and what they can handle. That's what I took from it.
Well, that's one of those things too. I mean, this was one of the big debates in children's psychology through the 20th century was the nature versus nurture argument, right?
And that's what my mentor, we talked about this earlier in the semester, and basically we kept saying that he made the point that especially in social science, they kept making arguments and kept figuring out that they're wrong about everything and kept going back to the drawing board basically.
Oh yeah, that's definitely part of it. Well, and I think part of it was that they were trying to come up with a unified theory of psychology, and that's still
it's just not. There's no relevance to that.
We have they're starting to be in the last 15 years kind of an undercurrent. I'm in the field, but so I know this, but there's been an undercurrent of the idea that we need to move away from a medical model, from a clinical model with psychology, because two people raised in the exact same environment can suffer from the same negative stimulus and have entirely different outcomes because human will doesn't fit into a test tube. And also, I mean, just there's different people have different resiliences. So the person that can get catharsis from a video game, where they go around and blowing people up, they're another person would be traumatized by a world in which it's okay to just go around blowing people up. So even
that perfectly explains the difference between Wortham and Bender's opinions right there. Loretta Bender, she said, if somebody reads something that they don't like, and she's referencing a child in this quote, or paraphrase, they'll be traumatized by it and they won't read it again. They'll throw it. She said she'll throw it out the window.
Yeah. And with Bender was a mother as well. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think she was like a mother of 3 or something. She definitely had kids, because my desire is to meet up with the family and try to, because none of the books that I've read, have anything about her. I would like to bring more clarity and, information to the comic book fans out there that want to read that sort of stuff.
And the interesting thing about that, from the reason I ask about her being a mother, is presumably a professional woman and a mother in the 1950s meant she also had a husband. So her relationship with children would have been colored by, that nuclear family. Whereas Wortham, and I'm not saying he didn't have kids, but as a professional, I mean, this as well as I do, we dudes compartmentalize really hardcore. And like what we experience in our personal life does not necessarily reflect on our work life. Right. And I don't think, so I think that for Wortham to go to work every day and to see people's lives ruined and to try to, and say if his one goal is to help people and to keep people from injuring themselves, then if all he sees are broken families, or most of what he sees are broken families, that's going to color his work in a different way than Bender, who sees broken people, but then goes home to her not broken people and says, most people aren't broken. My family's not broken. My kids don't read horror comics because they're smarter than that. Ta-da! I think that's going to be a different calculus involved with all of that, just because of the environment in which they see themselves and the intersection between the personal and the professional being different because of how men and women see things.
Yeah.
And I see also mental health professionals, and this is maybe a little inside baseball, but if you see counselors and therapists and support workers that come from stable environments, they have a different outlook than people that don't. That's just,
I would
that's very different. There's a lot of broken people that end up professionally working in mental health. It's a little scary. But yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things. And and Bender has all but disappeared from the public record. And like you said, there's nothing about her personal life, much about her career that's there. But in terms of the popular record,
I made that point in my paper because I found she has a couple things regarding comic books academically that I was able to find. they had a paper of her obituary, and it was no, it wasn't her obituary. So in the New York Times, they didn't mention comic books, which she lived in New York City. So DC Comics is in New York City. So this is 1980. They don't mention it. And then they have a academic paper that was remembering Loretta Bender, and it was her colleagues, her peers talking about her. Read the whole thing. I didn't really read the whole thing. I kind of skimmed for comic books, and, nothing, So I made that point. This is a woman that doesn't get credit for, a profession that she did for at least, I think, about 10 years, which maybe she, I would find it interesting to find out more if kind of being harassed or getting such aggressive questioning during I've only read the testimonies. I haven't seen them, so I don't get the emotions or anything like that. But I wonder if basically she washed her hands after those Senate hearings and just never had anything to do with comic books again. But yeah, like she used to take the books, give them to the children, let them tell them if they liked the stories. They would have group sessions about them, all kinds of cool stuff like that.
That's another really interesting thing too, because I don't know as far as like that going on in the 50s, I don't know if you're familiar with the graphic medicine movement, but it's the idea of using comics and sequential art as an educational and psychological tool, right? Mm-hmm. And so with the whole concept of graphic medicine, it's not just like reading comics as a way of taking in information, or the idea of hero stories as catharsis. Those are part of it, but it's also the idea about making comics. Mm-hmm. And actually the process of using creativity and using sequential art to help people work through, whether directly or indirectly, through their own past, their own histories, their own futures, their own hopes and dreams, their own traumas. And that for some people, in some cases, it's about telling autobiographical comics. For some people, it's a case about using hero stories as metaphors, or talking about whatever. So directly or indirectly, but it's something that I've had a little bit of exposure to professionally, since I make comics and am in mental health. I've been to a few things that talk about the crossover there, but it's really interesting that that's something that was going on behind the scenes as a quality control feature back in the 50s. And I don't know that that's something that happened since then. Right. I was sure that if Stan Lee and Marvel were doing that in the 60s, that I would have heard of it.
Somebody would have said something.
I
think here's what I think. I think comics were huge when they started. You hear all these stories about they were selling millions of copies. I think they were making a lot of money. Then what happened in the 50s? Frederick Wertham, the Comics Code. They broke up an antitrust distributor. So there was one magazine called American. Of course, the name, I had it, and then as soon as I was about to say it, it disappeared. American something Publishing, and it's they broke it up, and so all these comic book companies also had a hard time finding distributors then. Could be kind of the same thing we see if Diamond goes away, and then there's one more, the television. The television comes into American TVs, into American houses, and kids spend more time watching TV and just a little bit less time reading comic books. And so the industry, with all those four huge factors, kind of flatlines. And that's, where it is until a few years later when you hit 62, 63, when Marvel takes off again like a phoenix.
Yeah, that's an interesting timeline, man. And that's not something that, that comics kind of bottomed out. The other thing too about that whole thing, one of the little pieces of the narrative that I had believed, that I just don't think is true. Is the idea
that's the thing.
Well, I know, right? The idea that that the golden age ended because superhero comics ended, but it really wasn't, because even though superhero comics died down, there was westerns, there was all kinds of stuff. There was romance comics were huge in the
I think,
late.
I think that the deal is you had more diversity in terms of comics because you had all kinds of different stuff, and they were huge. What was Crime Does Not Pay was selling like 1 million copies per issue at that point. The EC comics, they're seen as a small publisher, but they were a really profitable, like middle of the road publisher. They weren't Dell or National Comics, DC Comics, but they were like a little bit under them. So
and that's really, yeah. I mean, and Dell had for somebody that didn't make it through the 70s, Dell had a huge publishing wing. And what was their reprint imprint?
They sold, I don't know what numbers they were doing, but they had everything that was cartoons, so it was like that's, if you got Disney and Looney Tunes and everything like that, then you're doing great,
Oh yeah.
And so the thing that I would want to find out, I don't know if you can ever prove any of this, but they were really angry that EC Comics is being compared with Dell, because they're the cartoons, the nice friendly children books being compared with the crime, the horror. And so I wonder also, we know the dealings with DC Comics and their history with people suing Fawcett, the rights with Superman and Batman and all this stuff. I wonder if there was really like mischief, just fraudulent intentions there, where they tried to put everybody out of business using the comic code, because they were the ones that drew it up, the rules and everything.
Dell and DC?
Yeah. From my understanding. So I wished, the bad thing is the coronavirus basically halted like any real like type research that I would be able to do, because the archives, they're all closed. I called Warner Brothers, trying to get a hold of their history department, stuff like that. It's all no, but they all closed down. They were like, sorry, it's not going to happen.
Well, and I wonder how free they would be with something like that too. I mean,
something like that, who knows? But
yeah, I don't know. I know if you're the right person, you can get in to look at the archives, because they have everything archived.
Yeah.
I've and when he tracked to do Starman, he's Starman stuff and everything that he had in that. I'm not sure my stream didn't just lock up, so I have no idea.
Let me turn off my camera. Hey, look at that. Maybe I'll leave and come right back.
Right there, Captain. Some people, I don't know if one is out there. Oh, Cap just dropped. So who knows if that works. He comes back. Let's see if we can do this here. Try to add him.
All right. We doing better now?
I think so.
I missed everything you said, though.
Yeah, I can't remember even what I was talking about. At one point, you froze up, and I was kind of carrying on, and then I'm like, no, I froze up. I don't even know. I'm just going to talk and see what happens. We've got some people. We do have some people that are watching, but nobody's left any comments in the chat, so I don't know what happened out there in YouTube land.
Yeah, YouTube's been jacked up today, too.
I have heard that. I have not experienced it myself at all.
I was watching New Mint Condition, and they lost all comments. Nobody could leave comments. And if you fell out of the video, I guess you couldn't come back in.
Huh.
And so, like, I was just playing video games and finding out what, comics were coming out in the future. So I mean, I wasn't making any comments, but
Yeah, no, I was watching Preston's Poulter stream earlier, with the premiere or whatever it was, and I was catching it in between appointments at work, so I was keeping up on it. But I didn't. There had been some interesting comments in the chat before, and I went back to look at them in the replay, and they weren't there. I don't know.
so stuff's it's all goofed up today.
Oh man, yeah, it's pretty wild, pretty wild. The metal has joined us there, at least now. I don't know if he was there before, but he is voicing himself there. But yeah, so I am curious. I do also harbor some weird suspicions about the whole comics code, the way it was drawn up. I mean, obviously
We know for a fact, or I don't know if we know for a fact, but we know off of EC's stories, which Bill Gaines have everybody's told fabrications. That's all I'll say. It seems like everybody in the comics code is told a little bit of white lies every once in a while, how big they are, whatever. But we know for a fact that I said it again, but we know the stories about the comics code targeting them in particular.
Yeah, he claimed to believe that, and there's no reason to not believe that he believed it.
But the thing to realize is there was I think there was 29 or 32 signed up with the comics code because they had to.
Mm-hmm.
24 of those publishers were bankrupt within the next year or two. So, and for example, you had to be part of the comics code to be distributed by any of the the distributors, because they wouldn't do it otherwise. Well,
and at one point, wasn't National owned by one of the companies that owned one of the major distributors as well?
Or it's this factoid is in the Marvel versus DC book. I don't see it I have it, but National or DC Comics owned the distributor that distributed Marvel comics. So back in the day, you know how you had Tales of Suspense, and it had an Iron Man story, and it had a Captain America story, and then you had Nick Fury, and I don't remember which one was with Nick Fury, but you basically had Giant Man and Hulk. You had two stories in one book. The reason why they did that was because the distributor, who was owned by, or I'm not sure which one owned which one, but DC Comics wouldn't let them publish more titles. So they had to double up the stories so they could get more stories and more creations out to the people.
Yeah, because that was all part of Marvel's scheme, right? Their plan was to build this universe that was expansive enough to bring people in on it. So they could say, just hook them in the world outside your window, which I can't disagree. I think that's a great plan if you can pull it off.
And so when they started selling more, DC started letting them publish more.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think it might have been by the early 70s or something, they got their own distributor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was one of the big that was one of the big problems Charlton had too, was because they were constantly negotiating for a better distribution deal, and that's eventually what ended up killing him, if my understanding is correct.
I don't know that one, but
yeah,
I mean,
think
if you're not reliable to your customers, if they're worried about how do I get this book, what good is it getting a better deal on distributing?
Yeah, well, and I think they wouldn't go with whoever was the other distributor. I think that was one of the deals with Charlton, is that they just would not go with the same distributor that was distributing Marvel and DC, and so that was part of the reason that their distribution was pretty spotty. But
that's the thing that it seems like. It seems like through most of not just comic book history, but just periodical history in general, there's only been at one time a the biggest distributor, and then like smaller ones.
Well, and even that would broke down. I mean, like back when I was coming up, and I didn't know this at the time, I learned about it later. But when I was coming up, and we used to get comics at our local co-op, right? In fact, every when I was little, when I was even in my high school years, every gas station, every grocery store, every big box store in Scottsbluff sold comics. There'd be a rack somewhere that was maintained by the news distribution. Kent News is the company that would distribute them, and they'd handle all of the comics and most of the magazines and some of the newspapers in all of these little places, right? Because like our USA Today's and the Omaha World Herald and that stuff was done by Kent News, and then like our local papers would do their own. That's how that would work out, because we had 3 local papers. Anyway, that's a whole thing. But because you don't care. But with our comics distribution, that was all handled by Kent News. Kent News bought from these other companies, and like a lot of these other little local distributors would buy bulk comics from the big guys out in New York and Chicago and wherever, and that's how they got to the little towns. And so, like, you couldn't get comics in the newsstands in New York, but you could get them in the newsstands in Scottsbluff back in the 90s.
Because they were buying them out, or
because they were buying the leftovers, or they buy the overstock, or however it worked out. And then those distributors were handling them at all of these little like mom and pop shops across the, West Nebraska. And so I mean, even I could get a different selection of comics, based on what part of the cities I was in, because of how the distribution worked. I always got JSA at the place on B and 27th. I mean,
well, and a lot of people want to get comics back on the back into that cycle, which that cycle doesn't really exist. I think they're basically arguing we need to get them into like Walmart and other department stores, basically. Which I don't know. I think it's a huge. I think the comic industry needs to move away from, me personally, just single issues, because they don't write for single issues. So why have them anymore?
I think that there's definitely something to be said for that, but the problem is if you're going to do it, right, here's the ticket. It's got to be multi-pronged, and it has to be all at once, right? Yeah. You have to,
and not everybody's going to do that. That's the problem.
Exactly. But you got to roll out.
If DC did it, for example, let's say if Marvel and DC did it, then everybody would follow suit, because you're going to follow the big boys. Yeah. But at the same time, Marvel and DC really has no incentive to do it, because they're making all the money.
Well, and on top of that, like Marvel, I don't believe is actually making money, but the beauty is they don't have to make money. If they lose money, it's actually better for Disney, because Marvel movies are making money, and if Marvel comics lose money, that means Disney doesn't have to pay taxes on the movie they make on the money they make on Marvel movies, because they get to offset the money they lose in Marvel publishing. It's a loss leader. It's a known thing. For almost a decade, Google lost money on YouTube on purpose.
They did.
Because they let YouTube be a loss leader until like 2018 was the first year that YouTube ever made money, and they started doubling up the ads, and they did that because the money they were getting back was not offsetting the money that they were losing. And so as an agency, they let it slide for almost 10 years just because they could write it off on their taxes.
And that tells you exactly all these people that are like, support this other thing, avenues, which I think is good. Anything that's coming up is going to take, like you just said, like a decade to even become profitable.
Yep.
If it's good.
If it's good. And that's one of the problems with taking I know Alterna was trying to hit the newsstand in the East Coast, and they just weren't getting the kind of numbers to generate that. You've got the Brightwisers experiment in Walmart, and who knows how that's going to go.
These are all very huge risks
they're massive. And the problem that you've got is, in order to make something like that work, you've got to have name recognition. You've got to have easy markets. You've got to have low price points. You've got to have high quality, all at the same time, right? And the closest you have to that, and just luck. And the closest you have to that right now are DC's $5 100 pagers at the Walmarts.
Apparently, those are doing like gangbusters.
Those are doing okay, and they're doing okay enough that they've opened them up to direct market sales too. They're doing a newsstand version at Walmart, and they're doing a comic store exclusive version at the comic shops now.
I didn't even know. I thought those 100 pagers. I didn't even realize this. I thought those 100 pagers were like reprints. I guess they have some reprints, but also some exclusive new stuff in it as well.
Yeah, every one of them has one new story and then like 5 reprints. So it's a new 12-page story.
You don't want to buy it, but
well, the thing is, like I've been picking up the Aquaman ones because they're ones that I didn't have because like they're stuff that was published when I wasn't buying comics.
Aquaman, so that would probably be a good one for me to buy.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where like I know I don't have any of these comics because I wasn't reading the comics when these were being published, so I can catch up.
Yeah.
So, and paying $5 a month is not a huge like hurt on my wallet either,
No.
So and I've gotten
and you're getting like 5 comics. I mean, that's really the avenue. Like people complain, nobody buys anthologies, and it's like, well, yeah, because you're not doing like high quality good anthologies. I mean, if you did, but if these are selling really good, then I don't know. Maybe you should have a Batman book that has like 5 different types of Batman stories in it.
And one of the things that they have too is they've got such a huge market to pull from, because like some of the stories that they've done the reprints of are like 70s Batman stuff. Some of the stuff is later on. So I mean, it's a good blend of all that kind of stuff, and I think that's part of the issue. And the price point is low enough where it's just above impulse buy for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and
$5. I mean, $5 is.
Yeah. But when it's a square bound huge thing, then it's a little different story.
A kid's gonna take like an entire day to read that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And so
that's $5 right there.
Well, and one of the things you look at with those things too, Matt C has joined us. But one of the things you look at with those too is like if you get the Shonen Jump or the My Hero Academia prints, those are hundreds of pages, black and white, manga style, and they are, they're still like $10 is all. So I mean, they're 100, 200 pages. I can't remember how big they are. They're comparably large for a comparable price, but the DC ones are colors. So if you like superheroes, then that's a pretty good market to get in.
It would be better if they could get them in the lines, where the candy bars are. Yeah. Like, and the periodicals, the tabloids, like that would be better, but because I'm not even sure. I've never even actually looked for them in Walmart, if I've got to be honest. But
in our Walmart, we've got one of the impulse buy aisles is all nerd stuff, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and that's where the comics are. It's right up front. So it doesn't get a ton of traffic where it is, but it gets enough that they move some there.
Yeah.
I wish that they had more than one facing. I wish they had some up front and some back in the toys.
Yeah,
because that's how it was. That's how it was when I was a kid. They had some comics by the magazines and some comics by the toys. So I always could go like and get my pick at the Walmart. So, but yeah, and I think that's one of those things that when looking at distribution models, it's a challenging thing because you're going to lose some, right? Yeah. And for a lot of people like me, us indie creators, we really would love to have the opportunity to sell to a huge wide market, but you're going to lose more than 50% of your printed stock to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's just not a risk that anybody can get into. And for me anyway, I mean, I need every single copy that I print to go to somebody to afford to print more comics.
Yeah.
That's the problem I'm in. I have I don't lose money at it, but I also don't make any money at it.
Yeah, that's the thing about indie comics is most people do it for fun.
Just for the love, man. Yeah, you got to. But yeah. So that is, I think all of the Wortham questions that I had, plus some extra stuff. And I have to agree with you, though. I do think that and we talked about this last time, and I just got to say it again. I have this suspicion, and the more that I've read the stuff you sent over, the more I agree that Wortham was a scapegoat for a lot of ills that weren't really his fault.
Did I already mention about what the Senate did?
Oh, no, you didn't.
I completely, we got sidetracked. It was probably when we froze. So I'll end with this factoid. So previously, the Senate had convinced the movie industry to self-censor. And so they did the same thing. They knew they couldn't make laws, regulating these industries because of the First Amendment, and so they set up Wortham and picked him to go against people like Loretta Bender and some of the other people that worked in the comic industry to contradict them, and advised him to use those sort of to develop that sort of testimony, and they let him talk almost without any hard questions. They gave him some softball questions, but 20 minutes basically narrating his argument. So we have a perfect outline of what he thinks in the testimony, while Loretta Bender got all these very hard questions where her wording is sort of not perfect, and you're like, what do you actually believe and stuff like this. You could take it two different ways and stuff like that. But yeah, so like I said, he was very angry about the Comics Code Authority, and I think he realized after he testified and what happened that he kind of got screwed.
Because his entire point wasn't that comics should be censored, but that parents should be responsible for the purchase of them.
Yeah, and another, he liked the public eye, and he liked being a witness. So he also defended pornography in a different courtroom, and under the idea that this is for adults, this is adult entertainment, and so why shouldn't it exist? Well, his argument here is this is children entertainment. It should be that sort of entertainment then. And so he didn't want to censor, so make them, what I said before, basically ban the sale of comic books for this age and below. Parents can buy them if they want to.
Yeah, that's so much, and that I did not know about the porn thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, if anybody is really interested in Frederick Wortham's life and his arguments, it's all laid out. It's a pretty long book, but it's called Mass Media, Frederick Wortham, something, something, something. It's basically Bart Beatty's, is that the right? Yeah, Bart Beatty, I think. It's his dissertation. And so that was like the first book I read, and it was basically the foundation, of where I went from there.
So that is fascinating. So once again, thanks for having me on and talking about a very complicated individual who is the boogeyman of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. So
yeah, basically you can tell if somebody's read anything about him because they immediately get angry, or they go, oh yeah, they start giving some insightful comments. You know which way they are.
Yeah. So Critical Blast in the chat. Silver Kilt told me years ago he believed the CCA saved the comics industry. That is one of the claims and the contradictory claims. And I think I actually have an interesting, I'm developing this more. I had the same opinion for a long time because I think that there's a certain amount of censorship that makes creative people work harder to tell their stories. You look at the amazing stories that were told under the Hays Code and for film. But the one of the situations about it though is that coercion is not necessarily the best way to go about creating art either.
Yeah.
It's if people have voluntary rules that they abide to, you have a lot of the same kind of thing. And I think that
see how the creation of the Comics Code Authority forced the comics industry to revamp how they told stories, because you only had 8-page stories in the Golden Age.
Yep.
Then they turned to 20, and now now you're getting 6 pages for one story, or 6 issues for one story. But
if you're lucky. Well, and like the Steve Epting in the 70s with Batman, and Marv Wolfman with Teen Titans, and Chris Claremont X-Men, those were long
oh yeah, years.
So, and some of those weren't even like, because it was the way the episodic nature of it, they weren't even like you're telling a story, you're telling so many stories that fit into a soap opera, just exactly like
back then.
Yeah, they were, no question about that. But yeah, I think that's I think restrictions help creatives be more creative, but at the same time, I don't know that should be coming from government or being threatened by government. I think the editors should just be cracking whips on the people that work for them constantly.
Yeah, people should just I'm sure it still happens even today, but the 1950s, it seems like there was a lot of like, hey, you guys do this from government, so we don't have to do this, or we're going to come after you. Yeah.
And then like you said, with the Hays Code, they pulled that off, and they didn't really have the authority to, and that was one of the things that's an interesting little tidbit there. Well, we'll go ahead and let you go.
All right.
Captain, thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks again for coming on. If you're free to stick around if you want to, but I understand, you've got a life, you've got a family, you've got, comics to read and games to play and all that kind of good stuff. But thanks so much for tuning, for coming in and talking about your paper. And I look forward to reading your piece for the Corona Kings Volume 2, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So it's a free zine. We did one issue that was released 1st of May. We're going to do another that's supposed to be released 1st of June if everyone gets things together. That is just, it's free content by essays and stories and comics by some different people on the different parts of Twitsphere. I'm having an 8-page comic that I'm having a guy, Carlos, is doing the art for. It's in universe of Ideal Comics. In the first issue, I did one that was 1 page, just my stuff. And just a silly little if Beetle Bailey was little Beetle Bailey kind of thing, but not really Beetle Bailey. Anyway, doesn't matter. You can go check it out on the Comics Underground and read it. and all that kind of stuff. And then the next one, we're having another thing up, and you're having a piece on there as well.
Yeah, mine's going to be the edgy boy one where I tell you to go read Frederick Wortham.
That's a dangerous statement at this point juncture.
Yeah, I need to write a new intro because it's not academic. So I'll say nice seeing you too. Neostar Productions, he said hi.
Yep.
So, I got to go to the bathroom, so I'll let you guys go.
Let's catch you later, man. Okay. Matt, how's it going, man?
Hey, doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. So, oh man, I tell you what, you are you've gotten all of. I'm a little tired, but you've gotten completely funded for volume 2 of Kyrie, yeah?
Yeah. Thankfully, it took I was a couple hours shy of 60 days, and as you know, I had planned. I set up a $500 funding goal.
Mm-hmm.
With the understanding that if we didn't, if things plateaued and we never got close to what we actually needed, which was a little over $6,000, that I just refund everybody.
Yep.
But that was going to let me go over 60 days, because honestly, most of us need it, and I don't understand why. I guess they just don't want to clut up their website with a lot of campaigns that are running for multiple months trying to campaign. But I knew it was going to be a struggle, so I just wanted to guarantee that I'd make the book. But thankfully, I didn't even have to do that. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe next time I won't even do that. Maybe I'll actually put what we need. But,
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think it's an interesting strategy.
yeah.
And it's something that I wish we would have done. I would have thought of last summer when we did the Expositioner book. Of course, we're running into all kinds of problems with that anyway right now. So I don't know. I don't know if you read. You could have.
No, I've been seeing the update. I've been browsing the updates.
So I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I was hesitant to say, "Oh, hey, Matt backed my book," except it happened.
Yeah, it did.
But we're for those of you guys who didn't back or didn't know about it or curious, our pencil artist Rico had some problems, death in his family. His father passed away suddenly, so he's been in a rough place. And with that, our art's not done, and with everything. So I don't know. We're kind of stuck right now.
Yeah. Well, don't you think it's like, I hate to say, the real comic is the friends you made along the way, but it almost kind of feels like that sometimes. Well, like the story of actually creating this junk is as interesting as the stories we're putting in the comic. Sometimes.
I think there's something you said for that, especially when you look at, I mean, like while I've been kind of in this holding pattern, I've been working on lettering pages, been working on the ash can, all that kind of stuff. Nobody's written back to say it's terrible yet. So if they either haven't read it or they liked it.
Nice. Yeah. Gotta love that.
Which is crazy. The one ash can we just sent out, I will tell you this much though. I'm very proud to have presented it. I think it's really, really good. It's called the Mark Question Case Files, The Lord of the Shoes. And it is a paranormal murder mystery that my buddy Chris and I wrote in 2009. And we started it as an experiment. We were going to host a mini con back then here in our little town. We had plans together, and we had this scheme of, can we do with a whole group of people? Can we? Because there was 2 writers and 4 artists. Because I kind of draw and Chris kinds of draws, and we had a couple other of our partners who knew their thing, and so we said, can we make an 8-page, 12-page comic in a day, writing, drawing, everything, like a 24-hour comic book day, but a whole bunch of us as a jam comic.
Wow, we
could not.
That doesn't sound humanly possible, but I really admire that attempt.
We actually came fairly close. It was 12 pages. We wrote the whole thing, all the dialogue and everything. And most of the pencil art was done. And about half of the inking was done in about 10 hours. Wow. Yeah. But then we didn't get finished, and we had to sit on it, right? Because life went on, and the story kind of sat there, and bits and pieces of it got lost during moves and everything else. I actually went through and finished the pencil art about 4 years ago. And then one of the partners, Barry, ended up moving, and page 9 disappeared entirely.
Yep.
And so
it does.
I got the stuff all back, and it was all different sizes of paper and all kinds of stuff. And my son Taliesin redid page 9, and cool. We ended up having 5 people contributed to all of this story, and I went through and grayscale colored it, and it is and it's done. So anybody who backed the campaign, you have a copy waiting for you in your inbox.
I gotta read it.
You can.
That's wonderful.
After we fulfill those, some people get paper copies of it. Everybody's getting a digital, but some people get paper copies of it. And after we fulfill that, it'll be available for purchase. As well, it'll probably be $1 will be the price point on it. Maybe 50 cents digital. I got to figure that out. But once we get a store, that is, which I need to get, we need to do that. But
nice.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
What are you doing with I mean, I guess there's so many options nowadays with the
Yeah.
digital store hooking that up to your website.
Well, we really lean in toward, and we keep going back and forth on this because I don't like owing things to anyone. And the last digital store we had was at Comic Central, and they were really good to us as far as a platform. I loved their layout, but they decided they just couldn't justify the bandwidth for the amount of people that were using their service for free, right? Well,
Yeah.
they took a cut out of sales, but like they didn't generate the amount of sales to generate the amount of income to generate the money to keep the site going for the amount of space they had. So, which is fine. I understand that. We have a kind of a lot of space on our server that we have anyway, where we host Forces of Good and Evil. And so I keep waffling between using like Store Envy or something like that, or going with just learning how to code, because I know the PHP WordPress can do it. I just need to get better at it.
Well, now you've got me wanting to look. Let me find out what I use.
Well, and Dan Fan, I can't remember her real name at the minute, but she with just relaunched her website, and it is what is it? Bright Star Productions, but it is sharp. And she had a Wix store and then paid a fellow to transfer the information just to a regular PHP so she could just host it herself. And then she went through and like, I just had a conversation with her because I said, your site looks awesome. How did you do it? And she's like, well, I did this and I had somebody this, and then the features that I didn't get out of the Wix store or that I didn't want to pay for, I just looked it up. I did the YouTube research until I could make it sit up and play nice. And I'm wow, okay. That reinvigorated me. If I had fewer stories to write, I would learn this. But yeah, so I'm balancing between like, do we want to do like something like a Store Envy or one of those other sites and host it and give them a little bit of money to use their coding, or do I want to just invent something new and keep it all on our back end and cut out the middleman? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm still, man, I was hoping you would, if you talked for like 30 seconds more, I would figure out. There's some ways to, there's actually, there's some cool, and it doesn't take that it's not that challenging. It's the sort of thing I can help you out with, which means it's very easy. Cool. Where you can do these kind of, it's a store that no one but you sees, sort of thing. And then it interacts with your landing page wherever you happen to have that hosted, and you can put it on free sites.
Sweet.
You could just do it on like a WordPress kind of situation.
Well, that's really intriguing to me, because one of the things that she did with her site that's so cool is that it's all integrated, right? So it's got the landing page, and it's got like you then you click one of the links from her little hamburger menu and it brings up her comics page, and it's got a format for her web comics, and then she's got a shop page, and they're all integrated so that you can, and like on her, she's got it set up so that you can like have a donate button on her free comics, so you can donate if you want, which is something I desperately want to do.
Yeah, that's probably what she's doing.
Because like that's the same thing that I've been wanting to do for a decade, and because we had this whole, when we first started, well, more than a decade, probably 14 years, probably 13 years is when we started coming up with these ideas. Wanted to have a bunch of free material out there so we could look at it, and then as we got products, then people would be like, oh, I like these free stories, I will pay, for this. And look at e-comics as microtransactions, and then build up to print comics and t-shirts and the whole ideal comics dream. So
okay, I'm sending in the private chat, finally figured it out. I use Stripe, which is free to use. They take a cut off the top, which is very minimal. It's mostly like their credit card transaction fee. Right. And that's the way I do what you're seeing your friend do, which is it's like a way to integrate it onto your site. So you don't
acquaintance.
Have to use someone else.
It's very casual acquaintance.
Oh yeah, sure.
I don't want to be too familiar with people.
I apologize if I forgot her names. I was like, you're
yeah,
a friend there. And
Well,
that implied something
Well,
else.
that's not even her name. That's just her username on
Sure.
YouTube.
Yeah, that's how we all are, aren't we?
Yeah, well,
Most
many
of us.
Many of us.
Yeah. I should start spelling my name with one T. Got to throw them off the scent.
So that's actually kind of what I did. It's a sort of an open secret. My actual name has 2 T's, but
I just doxed you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I don't care. That's not how I spell my real last name. My last name either. It is my last name, but it's not how you spell it legally.
Yeah.
But I started using that. I spell it the way I spell it as a pen name because I think it looks better on a page. And so it was an artistic choice because I think 1 T RHYS, it looks better. It's just prettier. So, since Matthew D. Reese, it just has a balance to it. It's entirely aesthetic.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, it's all branding online. It's all branding on the internet.
I decided to do that like before. I wouldn't say before online was a thing, but it was 95.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So,
all right.
Yeah, I've wanted to be a writer for a very long time.
So you're just thinking pen name.
Yeah, exactly. Nom de
that.
plume.
That's fine.
Yeah. So, now with Kyrie, you are jumping it up to 120,
152. I added 24. I added an extra. Some people's whole comic's worth. I added that to my book.
See, there you go. And so the whole set is gonna end up being 3 volumes instead of 4, right?
Yeah, that was part of talking to my editor / best friend. We were kind of thinking, looking at where I was thinking to end the this book 2 at 128, like where that story ended at that point. And thinking, we had a lot of positive feedback on book 1, but one of the things was like, can you give me a bit more in terms of story content and in terms of action and variety of that sort? So we just decided the 24 pages, the first 24, basically, the exception of the prologue and some things. We took some content from book 3 and we put it into this to help kind of put a bit more fun, surprising resolution to book 2. And that's going to open that frees us up to now have book 3. Maybe it depends. You know how stories are, especially comics, like they're a bit of an accordion. Like you can stretch things out and have it be satisfactorily, or you can, depending on how you edit it, you can scrunch it up too. But we may, I tell you, it'd be really nice. I know my wife would love it if I can just do one more campaign and finish this story. When I think about 2, I mean, I feel like I've given 5 years of my life away just getting 2 done in terms of just campaigning, much less. It's literally been 5 years drawing most of this stuff. So it'd be nice to just do it in 3 books. So I'm going to try,
At the risk of seeming ungracious, 5? Really?
Yeah, only. I had a lot more failures than you. I started a bunch that never went anywhere.
There you go. I've been working on Forces since 2005. So, actually, we concepted it in 2003. So that put you out there. But,
nice.
Yeah. It's been a challenge.
That's why there's wallet chains on your characters.
Oh, some of them. Well, and also it's the time frame they're set in.
Yeah. No.
It's appropriate for the time frame because we started the story to in 2005 to represent events going on in 2004. So, they're stuck in their moment in time. So, but yeah, which of course comes up to one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about with you. Your story characters are also stuck in time, being back in ancient Rome. Do you have, when you finish Kyrie up, what is your plan? Because I mean, you've got we've talked about this off air. You've got yourself a little universe, a little history, a little mythology going on with all of that. Are you going to delve into the world more, or are you going to just breathe?
Well, whatever I do, I hope I'm breathing. Because I feel like, yeah, it's hard. You feel like you're holding your breath through a lot of these things. But honestly, okay, so there's two approaches. There's to take to move kind of geographically within your universe, and then there's the other approach, which is to like go forward or backward in time. And both of those would be kind of nice. I think moving forward in time would let me breathe more, because you don't even have to know necessarily that the universe ties in at that point, depending on how you play. It could just be something nice for your, like a puzzle for your brain that only you as the creator know. And then everything in between up to actually fully including, I don't know, the main characters are the descendants of the same characters in Kyrie or something.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I'm looking at, like, I'm really, I don't know. It's almost like you just pick what you want. The 3rd century's got a lot of cool revolt. There's Zenobia who founds her own Roman Empire in Palmyra. And I think that would be kind of cool. And maybe do like a old woman Myra has to take care of a kid, kind of like a Temple of Doom sort of situation where a guy, an adult who's never been a father has to learn how to care for children like a good father does, and a kid has, who never had parents or has lost his parents in the situation that I'm thinking of, has to learn how to respect an adult in a parental situation who's maybe earned that position through some trials. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Or maybe Anglo-Afghan War is cool. I don't know. Celtic Britain's cool. I don't know. It's tough, man.
Oh yeah. I mean, and especially if you're, because I know you have a penchant for historical fiction, so you've got thousands of years to play with.
Yeah.
Right. Thousands of years, and I know, you've got you're talking about having one of your characters is a Galatian, and there's a whole bevy of history about how they ended up in Turkey to begin with, and whatever happened to these people, and that's a vast field for speculation. That's really fun.
Yeah. Like I love immigrant stories in a way, and the Galatians are an immigrant story, and I like upending my own expectations for who is from where. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I see a lot of people that don't have a clear sense of, they think, oh, Greeks are like this. Well, what about?
Well, and we are finding out, like, every shovelful of excavation that's going on in the ancient world shows us that they were way more connected than we ever imagined.
Yeah. It always tends towards that direction.
It always does. We always had this idea, and I think it's from the Romantic period about these isolated races that did isolated things, and like that's just so not true. Yeah. And that was one of the funniest things is from the 1860s on. One of the biggest reasons to like disbelieve the Bible's narrative was because these people never met or these people never existed, and it's just like no. They knew each other.
Yeah,
they absolutely. Like I was just listening. There's a Titus. Oh, I can't remember his last name. I just listening to a lecture by an archaeologist, like a genuine, like in the field, digging into the rocks, Indiana Jones style adventure archaeologist, who had who rediscovered this stele from a pillar in the Sudan that used to be a southern Egyptian temple, and on it, this pillar talks about all these nomadic tribes in the areas that Egypt was claiming to rule over, and this is from the late, I think the late 14th century BC, and one of the peoples are the nomads who worship Yahweh.
Oh yeah,
and it's the oldest inscription by hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. The oldest inscription of the word Yahweh in any language is on an Egyptian stele, dating to 100 years after the Book of Judges dates the Exodus.
Oh, I love that.
I'll
Yeah.
find the email. I'll email you the
Oh, please, yeah,
video.
send it my way.
Oh man,
Yeah.
it was amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's juicy.
Oh my
That's
goodness,
good.
it's so good.
Well, that's a, you know, I don't know. I don't think this is a rabbit trail, but that's another, like, people, I've been talking to friends and they've been saying, hey, have you ever thought about just taking a story that already exists and, you know, bringing that to the comic stage, you know, whether that's a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians are thinking like, hey, let's take the story of David and Saul and let's do it in space or something.
Yeah.
Or,
see, I think I have a different take on biblical history that I think is sometimes done, but it doesn't really seem to fire. It's weird. I think parallel stories are more interesting than adaptations, right? So I would love to have a video game that's it's like the Prince of Persia, right? But it takes place, so it's like a platformer puzzle game that takes place during the Book of Esther. So you are somebody else, but your life intersects with the events of the Book of Esther. Like all the sideline politics, all of Ahasuerus coming back from Greece ashamed after the Battle of Thermopylae, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I love. I mean, that's my number one favorite right there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because there's only. I mean, you don't get everyone's history. You just get a few. You know, these little like pinpricks in the historic record is all you get.
And I think those doing the narrative, telling the story parallel to a story we already know or are fairly familiar with, right? Because the part of the thing is, so growing up is in the church, if you get that story, you've heard, how many times have you heard the story of Ruth? How many times you heard the story of Esther? You know, by the time you're 14, you're sick of it. Not really sick of it. You don't want to be disrespectful to the text. My goodness sakes. If you're serious about it, it's the word of God. So you respect it.
Yeah. But you can't see it anymore. It doesn't, it's not a story. Yeah.
It's not, there are a few stories that for me growing up continue to capture my imagination the entire time. The Passion was one of them. And not the movie The Passion, but the actual like event The Passion. But and like David and Goliath, that was pretty much the other ones were just trivia, right? They got to that point. But when it comes to like as you're seeking out new stories, you know, man, if it was one of those situations where like, oh, here I am with this awesome Persian adventure, and it ties into these things that I sort of kind of remember from Sunday school. Maybe I'll go back and read Esther and be enriched in a different way. Or conversely, you know, somebody who wasn't familiar with the story of Esther, they're just like, wait, so this is based on real events, sort of, kind of? What are the real events? It was kind of like, for me, one of the disappointing things about the movie 300 was because it was this intense movie, and I was like, I want to learn more about this. And then I found out the entire movie is a lie. Nothing in it is real. It's all false. Everything, even the character of the Spartans was wrong.
Yeah.
And one of my buddies was like, no, it's supposed to be propaganda. And I'm like, okay, the real history is so much more interesting.
Yeah.
That I went and I read about the Battle of Thermopylae, and I was like, ooh. And it made me dislike the movie intensely.
Yeah.
It made me appreciate the Book of Esther more, having read the real history.
Talk about parallel lives. Yeah. Yeah, I got a buddy, a British comic buddy, who did the Book of Esther as a comic, and he's into rigorous historical detail and all this stuff. And he put in he did some panels that indicate that, you know, the hot gates scenario was happening at the same time, which is pretty rad. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I remember you talking about that, and his project looked really good, but I had zero cash at the time.
Oh yeah,
and I think I just backed Soul Finder, and that was the last of my money.
Yeah. Well, his deal, I mean, I've let him know this. Like, I can't support every campaign because of the international shipping, but what I do is I wait for him to build up. I mean, he's got such a professional get up going on where he's pumping these out so efficiently that it doesn't take that long before he's got like several comics already done, and then you can just buy the bundle and then just pay the shipping once.
Wow,
is what I've been doing. But yeah,
that's a good scheme.
Yeah, I you know, that's a scheme. It'd be interesting maybe in 2020. I mean, at this rate, probably not. But it'd be cool. Maybe 2021. That'll be the scheme that someone figures out, is how we can put a lot of these books that people want in the same space. I think people were kind of talking about that in the underground comics sphere, and then maybe they can kind of be shipped together or something. Yeah. I don't know. That's a challenge, of course, but
yeah, it definitely is. And that's one thing too. I mean, I think that, you know, with what Doug Garrett did with Napalm, and with what you're doing with Nashitobi's Carlton Crux, or Colton Crux, is just that idea about looking where the market is for these foreign creators. That's a big move forward too. I wish there was an opposite thing for people, or some sort of thing. I know Doug would never do it, but people like Doug TeNapel who have a huge international following, but you know, it's a big enough you got to sell them, or you know, but you're also, by the time it gets to Ukraine, you're losing money, you know.
Well, I know Jason Brubaker he had a scheme where he got what was it? He had a distributor in America, and then he also had a distributor in England, and he would ship a certain percentage of his books to that English distributor, and then from there he could just pay. Somehow he was still saving money, believe it or not, after that thing sitting in a container ship for a month, getting over there. He was still saving money doing domestic shipping from then on out from England to the rest of Europe because of his broad appeal over there, which I think, I mean, it didn't sound like, I guess in order to afford it, he had to go with a cheaper distributor that actually ended up costing him a lot in refunds, in returns. But I think just generally Europe is not they don't have as many options as we do with the competitive market of everyone's trying, you know, it's like I expect next day shipping and it's perfect, or I'm getting my money. Like they just kind of get what they can. They you know, they're like, I'm so glad it actually arrived. So
that's one of the things that, like, people like, this side note, I'm not trying to be snitty, but like, when people talk about like, oh, well, why doesn't America do this in light of COVID-19 when other nations are doing this? I'm just like, every other nation in the world is so ridiculously tyrannical with the way it's done. That doesn't fly here. That's why, like, people are like, oh, we're just gonna batten down for another month. No, people are gonna, like, you know, march in the streets and like, did you ever see the movie Tank?
I
think it's James Garner. This guy, like, there's some sort of corrupt local government, so this guy like fixes up a Sherman tank from World War II that was, like, you know, decommissioned and set in the city park, and so he uses it to, like, you know, make a Waco style stand against the corrupt businessmen that have taken over the local government.
Isn't this the guy? Okay, there was a guy that actually did this 10 years ago.
That's Killdozer. That's a different story.
Okay, did Killdozer get his idea from Tank?
I don't think so.
James Garner's Tank. Oh my gosh.
think so. I think he
Killdozer's
he was legitimately crazy. Like he did this rampage. Thankfully, no one died.
Yeah.
And then he shot himself. So
Yeah.
I mean,
So
like the guy was troubled, and I mean he also was ridiculously screwed over. I don't know if you've looked into that at all.
No, it's just something he just took out the tax office or something. Or...
oh man, he took out like half the town. That's a bit of an
wow.
exaggeration, but okay. So the dude had like a construction type company, and the land all around him was bought up and repurposed so that like he couldn't get the heavy machinery in and out of his shop. And so he couldn't fulfill contracts, and his business was on skids to start with. And so the city went in and approved all these zoning changes. And so like he was still zoned heavy industrial or whatever it was, but like the territory around him wasn't. And so he wasn't allowed to bring trucks in, like semis and everything that he'd need for his supplies. And his only chances of getting out of there, I mean, of his business coming back, were just shot to hell. And so he just decided, well, if I can't live the life I want to live, no one else can either. And so he turned his bulldozer into a death machine, and it was like concrete and steel. It was a bulletproof thing, and just tore through town and like caused like I think something like tens of millions of dollars of property damage, and then when he couldn't get out anymore, he shot himself. So it was a really sad story. But he also
it's a thoroughly American tale.
It is a thoroughly American tale. It's an American tragedy, and like I said, I mean he really he did not handle it well. I don't condone the acts of Killdozer, but he also was screwed over hard. I mean, they made his living impossible. Which seems a violation of this Declaration of Independence, that whole pursuit of happiness thing. But
I've been proud of our country going through this crisis, to be honest. Like, I didn't expect anything less than massive, particularly high-pitched hysteria. We never do anything without kicking and screaming, because we're so diverse, and we don't have an authoritarian leadership. We're always going to be fighting tooth and nail with our neighbors every step of the way, and I think that keeps people competitive. It keeps them on their edge, and it allows for a lot of really interesting ingenuity, particularly amongst the states, and down to the local counties and stuff, where you really get to see so many different options played out in real time concurrently in so many different scenarios. And are you Montana?
No, Nebraska.
Okay, that's right. Because I think it's the Montana governor is doing really cool things.
I feel very mixed about it. Because the whole thing, because obviously it's a deal. I mean, like, people are getting sick and dying. You can't deny that.
Yeah, it's real.
Right? It's real. People always get sick and die. And the thing that and I've said this several times the last several days, the thing that shook it for me, the thing that changed my Neil, thanks for stopping in. You're gonna miss Ichthus coming on in a little bit, but we'll catch you later, man. We're always the replay. But the thing that killed it for me, or like changed my mind about it, because it was one of the things where I was like kind of begrudging and like, okay, I don't want people to get sick, obviously, if it's as contagious as they said. They started doing antibody tests in the urban centers, right? And of course, I live in a city, but it's a very rural city. My county has like 30,000 people in it, right? So like I had, when this whole thing first started, George Alexopoulos came on, and I was telling him that, and he's like, "That's my neighborhood." And I was just like, "You got to get out of Jersey, man. That's insane." I might be exaggerating a little bit, but no, it was like there's like Scottsbluff itself has like 17,000 people in it, is all, right? And so there's Gering right across the river, and there's a couple of other. Our county has probably around 30,000 people.
Nice.
give or take. Yeah, very, very rural. And in fact, just yesterday, I took a personal day and I went out into the countryside. It took me about 10 minutes to drive out to a place where nobody was at. And I just hung out for a little while and took in the plains in nearly their untouched form. There are roads and there are houses, but they're far enough apart that you can just be out there and seeing it the way the pioneers did, man. I love it.
Goodness.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. Anyway, but this thing is, like I said, I felt in the big urban centers, they started testing for the antibody to find out who had already had it and gotten over the COVID. And in New York, they estimated between 75 and 80 times more people had it than the previous tests had indicated.
I heard LA County. I didn't hear New York.
Yeah, and it may be, and
they were at similar levels.
I think they're similar levels. Yeah.
Which I'm spreading the gospel of that. That's good news, and I'm seeing so many people disappointed and frustrated with me for spreading good news.
Here's the thing about that,
so
right?
Sad.
That means two things, right?
Yeah.
Most of those people were relatively asymptomatic, right? That's thing one,
which is great.
Second of all, it means it's already in the general population. Yeah. And from the beginning of the quarantine, it was too late to do anything.
Yes.
Right.
Very much too late.
So when people are like, "Oh, we're extending this to X," that's just the government taking advantage of you. That's the government telling you what it means to be human. It's somebody else defining your reality because it doesn't make a difference because it's already there. And I'm sorry, and it sucks. For those people that are vulnerable, that are likely to die from it, I'm not glad about that at all. But everyone is going to get it. Everybody on the planet within a few years is going to have had this.
Yeah.
When we're at that levels, and we just need to accept that, like, dude, people die from famine, people die freezing to death, people die. Death is part of life, and it sucks. But you can't, enslave in a population, or don't make slaves of my great grandchildren just so that you don't work for 2 months. And that's what we're at right now. Not so much in Nebraska. A lot of people are back to work here, but in a lot of places, they're just like nobody's working, and we're not generating wealth. We're not generating income. We're just, people have been burdened by all of this stuff, trying to stop something that was already too late.
Yeah. It's really sad. Like, I get, so the whole, like, the public health side of things, I get, and I saw this coming for a while, where public health is not in the business of telling people exactly what the facts are. And I think that's understandable. They're there to try and make sure that the public has the best outcome given those facts. And a lot of that has to do with making sure that everyone is calm and comfortable and they feel in control of the situation, and that they're in control of their personal health, even if they're not in control of the situation. You know what I mean? So they'll tell people a lot of things that they cling to in order to help them feel like, they have a sense of autonomy. So they'll say things like, washing hands really helps. It doesn't help that much. Wearing these masks, and they're trying to not make sure that there's not a panic, which is entirely understandable. That's their job, is to make sure there's not a panic, But
if people could learn to be more fatalistic, then they wouldn't have to worry about the panic, because it's just what's going to happen is going to happen. Yeah. And the thing about this, here's the part that gets me, right, is like and this is coming from, the grandson of homesteaders, right? My family were very passionate, very emotional, but death just happens, man. And you gotta keep a stiff upper lip, man. Yeah. That kind of stuff. And I don't want to be flippant about people that go through tragedy. That doesn't mean it's not tragic. It just means it's inevitable. Right. And if we had some of that pioneer stoicism that this country was built out of, that was part of our fabric, instead of the keep this hate speech off our campus mentality, you're like, what are the real stakes and how do we survive with the real stakes instead of worrying about how we feel about them?
Yeah. Survive.
We'd have a lot
survive
less
and
chance
thrive.
Exactly.
Yeah. And take risks in the face of that's the homesteader spirit. It's not just surviving, you can do that, just digging a hole in the ground and I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. It's
Yeah.
you bust the sod and you deal with the first hard year so that you can live the second year.
Yeah.
And if you live the second year, then God willing and the creek don't rise, you have a profit in the third year.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're planting crops that you will not see the harvest from, so that your children, when they're adults, they'll be able to reap the benefits of that,
Absolutely.
Planning beyond your own in service to your own family beyond your own particular years or your weekend. And it's sad.
And that's one of the things we've lost in the postmodern era. We've lost this idea of planning for the future, right? And the thing that's so frustrating to me about that idea, right, is that at the same time that religion is mocked for believing in the future that may never come, right? We have we believe there's an afterlife. We believe that there is a world beyond this. You can't prove it because it's not part of this world. So let's, but everyone's like, oh, you believe in all this crazy stuff, so we should just live life today. Okay, well, we'll live life today and for the future of today, but you're also throwing away the future of of this world because you're investing in it. But you're telling us if we, use the air conditioner, or if we, leave our fridge door open, or if we, forget to shut off the water, that we're dooming the planet. But you don't believe in the future. So, why do you get to make me feel bad for my choices when you don't even believe there's a tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad. Yeah.
It just makes me laugh.
And I've been talking with family and friends a lot about this too, but like, I think it's easy. Well, I don't know how easy it is. It's easier to scare someone, to compel someone into fear than to compel them into hope, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I guess we were able to get, and there's always going to be conflicting opinions on whether or not this was the best approach to take or what approach we should have taken. But we managed to get 7 billion people on this planet afraid. But now, how do you compel them to hope again? Like, I don't think it's going to be a politician. I don't think I'm on, like, if Fauci gets on the news tomorrow and says, you know what, we're good, let's wrap it up, guys, everyone get back to work, I don't think people are going to do it.
Yeah.
Or the people who are already going to do it are going to do it. And the people who went to bed tonight afraid are going to wake up tomorrow afraid no matter what.
And that's one thing
I don't know.
Both my wife and Doug TNAPL have said that there will be people that never leave their house again. And I think that's 100% right. The challenge the problem that I see in all of this is that these are people who might not necessarily directly, mind you, but like in the field of mental health I have as a community support worker, we try to help people overcome their fears and their hangups and their struggles to reach their dreams, right? And so many of the same people that people like me have spent years trying to encourage them into personal strength and ownership. Many of these people are like, no, you were wrong. It's too scary out there. The bugs will get me.
Oh, no.
The government told me so.
Yeah. Your carefully laid plans with these
no, and this is not necessarily that specific in my case, but I mean, I've seen that play out, that kind of thing play out before. And it's just sort of like, man, it doesn't, you still got to own your choices, man.
Yeah.
So, well, Ichthus is here. I'm going to bring him on.
Oh, great.
You don't have to leave or nothing, but.
Oh, you got an hour 3 tonight?
Yeah.
Nice. Well,
not a full hour. There's no way I'm making it a full hour.
I was going to say, you were tired when you brought me on.
I was. I've done one other 3-hour stream, and that was when Sixth came on to talk Napalm and Vietnam, and he was like, dude, you have no idea how late it is here. And I'm like,
Oh my god.
oh, okay. So I raced home from work and I did Sixth and Doug and George. It was 3 hours.
Nice. You gotta the blood, sweat, and tears you put into your show.
Oh man, I tell you what,
makes me always tune in. So
well, and the
thanks.
thing is I can't take too much credit because I do like very little planning, right? I have general questions and I never write anything down, and then I just vamp, right? It's just all about conversations. So I
love
just
it.
kind of take it where it goes, and then if I'm just like, I don't want to talk about that, how do we steer it away from talking about that? And sometimes I can't.
Yeah. No, that's big brained. I mean, you're one of those galaxy brained interviewer types, and I've always admired that. That's why
I'm just good at talking. That's all. It's
beautiful talent.
It's
I'll leave you to your third guest.
Yeah.
See ya, Ictus.
Now, before we go, since with Cummings we're talking about this, do you have anything for the next Corona Kings, Matt?
Well, I saw that the Rags team were gonna do like a preview sort of thing, and I thought maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah.
I've got preview content,
Ooh.
or I draw another illustration, but this time I'll probably, focus on the dimensions of the book and work within that.
Yeah, no, that would be cool, man. That'd be cool. So yeah, I am doing with Carlos. I mentioned this before. I'm so excited, dude. It's an in-universe story from 2014. I mean, I wrote it last month, but it's set in 2014 in our universe. So it's 10 years after we first meet the character of Rapunzel, and she's gone from being a sophomore in high school to a woman, and we'll get to see a little picture of her life as an adult. Carlos, I don't know his last name, who has done the art for Skinny's Otis Stein, is going to be doing amazing art on it.
Awesome.
I've gotten the first 6 pages of 8 back. It is so good.
I can't wait. I love his art.
Oh, dude, it's so good.
Yeah, that's thrilling.
So, Ictus, thank you for coming on. First time on the show.
Thank you. Now I can put it out on my bucket list. Finally in the matriarchy.
That's Mattriarchy. Matriarchy is ruled by women. Matriarchy is ruled by Mats.
Slightly different. I'll head out now, but yeah, you guys have fun. I'll be tuning in later.
Okay, cool, man. We'll catch you later. I do have beautiful hair, but I am thoroughly man.
I envy that hair, man. I tried to grow out my hair, and I don't know, man. Here in Florida is such a struggle, dude. It's like last year in summer, I don't know, we were breaking records with the freaking heat. It would be 100 degrees.
Well, and see, the worst of it, I've been to Florida in the summer.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you're talking about, because it's not just the heat. Here in Nebraska, 110, usually the hottest day of the year will be 110, 112. And we crack 100 routinely in July, first part of August. But it's semi-arid here. Okay. Nice. Which means that we have 40% or less humidity. Right. It's almost a desert. Right. In fact, in the 1800s, they called Nebraska the Great American Desert before they found Utah. Because it was arid, it was flat, nothing grew. I mean, trees only grew. It was grass everywhere. Trees only grew by the rivers, natively. It's very dry here.
Wow.
And so it gets that hot, and man, it's not that bad. Man, down there, 90 degrees, 80% humidity, just kill me. Wow. Oh my goodness. You walk out the door there and you're just I need a bath. I can't even imagine living there. I mean, I've said I visited, but that's it. Yeah, get me back to my plateau. I like it up here.
Oh man.
The high plains are where it's at for me, man. And I like the ocean. I like to visit the ocean in the winter.
I don't know. Apparently here in Florida is I don't know. We have this stereotype like everyone has a ocean in their backyard or something, and I'm like, nope, I'm not well aware of that. I mean, we have swamps.
Yeah. So you're further inland then, huh? You don't have to tell me where you're at, but
I'm a bit further south.
okay,
So.
okay, cool. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the project that you are working on, man.
Yeah, so JRPG, which is not exactly what you think. That's why it's an abbreviation. Juvenile radioactive. Oh no. Juvenile radioactive.
Is it pubescent?
No.
No.
It's pro wrestling gators.
Pro wrestling gators. There you go.
I got scared there.
You're doing that for the second volume of Corona Kings.
Yeah.
And how many pages is that going to be in there?
So far, due to like my issues with my job and stuff, like I practically work like 11 or close to 12 hours, so it's kind of like backtracking. Like I was hoping to like hit the first issue, but since again with my job thing, I pretty much had to push back. Hopefully, like I already got the first issue done, and big props to Cassidy Blonde, who is Pointman Comics, with his patience and stuff, and being my letterer and my writer. I finally got the first page done. But my game plan is that worst case scenario, I'll just bring out just the 2 pages for the Corona Kings.
Okay.
And then finish it. And I discussed it with Cassidy of my game plan, and he was like, yeah. So pretty much I'm hoping to get like 5 pages done, but worst case scenario, just bring out 2 for the second Zine and then finish it like the complete PDF, which is still going to be for free at the Comics Underground website.
Cool. Yeah, Doug's doing a real service, I think, with that thing, giving people a chance. And I've got a couple of our ideal books that are up there. I don't know if anyone's downloaded them or anything. No one's written me and told me how awesome they were. But that's okay. Yeah. So but yeah, I think I love that the we have in the chat, Juvenile Pro Wrestling Gators. Tell me more.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the funny thing is like everything like, how can I say? It's kind of like this. Every writer has been told this lesson is like, you write what you know. And I've grown up in Florida my entire life. And if you ask me, what was the first thing that you ever remember when you were a kid? I literally remembered when I was in, I think it was in the Miccosukee tribe, where they had alligator wrestling. So like literally, we were in the front row, and like I remember I was sitting on my dad's lap, and like he would like there was like a huge pool of gators, and I'm like, how the heck is this guy like fearless with all these gators surrounding him with this tiny little pool with this little tiny island on the sand? And I remember my dad would like pretend to push me. It's like, so yeah, I'm making a comic book out of my traumatization. So that could be therapeutical in a way.
That's actually really funny. That ties it. I'm going to let you know this because you didn't see this in first hour. Captain Cummings was on to talk about Frederick Wortham and the seduction of the innocent and the Senate hearing and all that kind of stuff. There was also at the Senate hearing before the foundation of the Comics Code Authority, there was a debate. I mean, there were several witnesses, but the 2 of them were psychologists, Frederick Wortham and a gal named Bender, and I forget her first name. And Bender was contracted with DC Comics back in the 50s.
Oh, wow.
And Frederick Wortham had his own practice in New York. With that, he so was the subject of psychology in comics was what came up through that. And I had mentioned this idea called graphic medicine that is out there, that there's a theory that comics themselves, working on them and reading them, can be therapeutic both psychologically and physically.
Oh wow, that's nuts.
And one of the ways is by using a story as an avenue for catharsis, working through your own traumas and your past histories by using art and story to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, there you go.
Well,
Have it. So maybe this will help you be a better adjusted person and not hate your father like you do.
Yeah.
Darn
yeah.
it.
Well, he's asleep, so I could take my opportunities right now. No kidding.
Don't say that on my show. I have no idea what you mean.
Oh, it's okay. They'll just like take a little clip of it and use it out of context.
Oh, I'm sure. Anyone that wants to hate you, they'll be just like, what is he doing?
But no, and then another one was I don't know what the heck are these boats called, but I remember like I was riding on these. It's like a huge fan behind you,
Yeah.
and you have to have like these earplugs on so that way like the freaking fan doesn't, bust your eardrums.
Oh yeah.
While you see gators, up close and personal too. So that's another one. But I remember when I was like brainstorming this idea that it's like really is like wrestling gators, and that's when I started thinking back of like gator wrestling and everything. Is like, yeah, no, this is totally perfect because like, I don't know, it seems really popular here in Florida with alligator wrestling.
Well, I think I love being able when people take a look at their environment and where they take a look and say, what inspiration can I gather from that? And how does that shape the way I look at the world? Because I think a lot of us, we get so connected by mass culture and mass media.
Yeah.
And we get so connected to those things that I think sometimes we forget our roots. And we kind of don't pay attention to where we came from in our family. And not necessarily just our family, but also where we're from.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big student of my own family's history and of the immigrant stories. I love immigrant stories. So when my family came here from Wales and from Ireland, I know a bunch of that kind of stuff, and I like to share it with people. But I think that it's really easy to get distracted by the flashing lights and the bells and whistles, and to forget the big lessons about how we got here, not just here to America, but where we got here in terms of our society. What are the good things we can pull from the past? And so I love that kind of stuff, man.
There we go.
Ironically enough, alligators are my favorite animals next to turtles. All right.
Don't worry, I'm wearing my Ninja Turtles because I have.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, so
Well, yeah, no, and obviously the JRPG, which I love that name for its like the double entendre in it.
Yeah.
But with it, it's very it seems to be also a loving homage to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You a big fan growing up?
Oh my god, dude! I remember. Again, this is coming from a kid who grew up in the '90s. Like, I remember when they showed it in the Saturday mornings, like, whoa! And then when later on in 2003, I remember when early promotions, because with I'm going to sound so old, VHS. I remember they showed like early promos of the CGI because CGI was such a big thing in the '90s. And I remember they showed like early promos of this new show for the TMNT, and it's going to be a CGI show. Mm-hmm. And out of all the networks that would pick it up is Hallmark out of all channels. And I'm like, Hallmark? This is like, I don't know how this.
Well, I tell you, the animated movie, the CG movie TMNT was pretty wholesome.
Yeah, no.
That.
Yeah. It's man.
Actually, that's one of my favorite like Turtles properties is that movie. I think they did a great job with it.
They did.
So
there was like a lot of Easter eggs too. Like really like, I think it's like their way of concluding the like live action movies from 1 to 3, and I'm like, what? It's like,
one of the fun things about it is it was both a sequel and not a sequel, and they actually pulled it off really well, which I've never seen anybody do that quite the same way. I think they kind of tried that with the second Hulk movie, with what's his name? The first Hulk movie with oh, come on, that actor.
Yeah, I know.
Edward Norton.
Yeah, I think that's the guy's name.
But it didn't quite do that, I don't think. But I also really liked Eric Bana Hulk, so I mean, it had problems, but I liked his performance in a lot of it. But you know, that's that. So
yeah.
So how long is the JRPG final project going to be?
How long? Like the pages?
Yeah, how many pages? Yeah.
Originally, it was going to be 8, but since due to writing and stuff, like I started, because again, this is my first comic, so it's going to be like little problems here and there. I started noticing, like, oh crap, like how did this character get to this place? It's like now I'm just thinking like pages. It's like originally it's on the script, it's going to be 8 pages, but now that there's like gaps that I started noticing, I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be more than 8 pages. But
yeah, I'll tell you, when we first started making comics way back in the day, my buddy Chris and I, actually, we were both trying to break into writing at the same time, and we wanted to focus on 8-page stories, because if you can tell a story in 8 pages, you can tell a story in 20 pages, no problem. And that was our theory. And so we did a lot of pitches and got a lot of rejection letters back in the day, doing 8-page spec scripts. And then when we decided to start our company, Ideal Comics, we kind of kept that. With we had a lot of mini comics that we worked out for the intention of that scripts, and some of them we've made complete projects, some of them we've extended out. But I still have a fondness for the mini comic format, for the 8-page format, and of 8 or 12, just because I think it's such a good proving ground for telling concise stories. You can always add more elements and more characters and background, but if you were a good enough editor to tell a compelling story in 8 pages and you can pare it down to that, then I think that's a really good format for it. But it does take a lot of knowing, what do I cut out? What do I leave in? How do I introduce all this kind of stuff? And you go from there. Hey, Star Storyteller, I haven't seen you in forever. Thanks for coming on. She just had a baby not long ago.
Wow, yes. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's been a few months, I think. I can't remember the exact, if it was January or what, but it's still a little baby. My little babies, my youngest one is 16.
No.
Yeah, wow. He'll be 17 in August. God, man. Yeah, I'm old.
How are you? I don't know, how are you feeling, man? Because
I don't know.
18.
No, I've been used to the idea of being old for a long time. So I mentioned this in the last segment a little bit. I work in the mental health field as a community support worker, but my focus is with young people. 16 to 18-year-olds is my main bailiwick. He'll be 3 months old on the 17th. Oh, that's wonderful. I love babies. Anyway, so I've been in the field for since 2004.
Oh wow.
Right? So it's been a while. It's been a while that I've been doing this thing, 16 years. And I've had like 5 or 6 crops of young people that I've seen grow up and move on, and then new young people come in, right? Through the course of the stuff. So I'm very used to being the old guy.
I don't know, just you how you say it too, and just seeing the new generation and stuff. Like, to me, bro, like I would love to read a comic about that.
Yeah.
Because, bro, it's like,
well, and actually one of the things that it's a very long story, but one of the ways we patterned out our universe was that we wanted to do a fixed timeline. Both Chris and I felt one of the things that Marvel and DC missed out on by having the rotating timelines is a chance to really let their characters organically grow. Right. They had to invent ways to unmature them so that they could go ahead and keep telling the same stories. And one of the things that Chris and I both felt was that if you fix time and you tell stories, and you can tell legacy, we both really like legacy stories, and we like to see history pass by. And so even in our stories, like I was talking about with Matt, you know, our character that I'm doing for the Corona Kings, she was she was 14 or 15 when we first introduced her, and now here's 10 years later, and she's going to be 25. And so we're going to be seeing a glimpse into her future when we've only ever shown her as a young woman in our main comic Forces.
Wow, that's really cool.
So and we have a bunch of stuff like that we just like to go on about, and I think that's it's working in my field has been something that's sped up my appreciation for legacy, but I've always had it. And some of my favorite comics are Jack Knight, Starman, written by James Robinson, and then his telling about the legacy passed from the Golden Age Starman on to the modern age Starman, and how that works out, and just seeing that history go by is just something that I've always loved. So I don't know, it probably comes from, I was really close to my grandparents before they passed away. My parents were the younger children of older grandparents. So, all three of my grandparents that I knew had lived through the Depression and everything. So, I mean, like, there was a lot of history that I was privy to seeing first and second hand. And so I think that was a big part of my appreciation. It was, back to, write what you know.
Yeah.
And I knew my grandfolks. So I'm not necessarily telling their story, but my stories are definitely informed by theirs.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So
no, that's beautiful, man. Because my parents, my mother in particular with my grandparents, like, they were born in Cuba. So, like, it's just crazy how this whole thing is, because they left Cuba when Castro took over.
Oh yeah.
And Castro let all the Cubans, like, look, you got like maybe like a week or two to get out, to go on an airplane and just do what you need to do. And my mom, she was like a baby at the time, so my uncle, he had to like fly by himself, but it was like a family member that they know that lived in, I believe, in Chicago at the time. So, like, he flew over to Chicago, and he was a principal over to the school that he was at. So pretty much everything was like set in stone. Like, once he lands to Chicago, like, he's going to the school. Like, he already has a house over his roof and everything. And once they, like, their entire life, like, they live in Chicago. But I think the most powerful thing that they did, like, was crazy, was like they choose not to use the government to pay for like things. Like, they were literally like broke. So, like, their entire life, my grandparents, they worked in a factory and just making sure that, I remember my uncle, when we visited Chicago, like, we were going to all the school, like, they literally like were walking distance to the school they were going to. And my uncle told me and my mom, was like, we were so broke that if a burglar comes, we would ask him, what could you find? Because they literally have nothing. And but yeah, it's like, it's just this generational thing, is like, how I got into art was, it's crazy, because due to like I had like a hard time understand, like, I knew how to speak Spanish at a very young age, but at some point in my life that I had to take speech classes. So then, like, this therapist says, like, oh, like, what language is he well aware of? And it's like, like, English. It's like, okay, then just talk to them in English. So crazy thing is, like, I believe when I was 5, I was at my grandparents' house, and they have like basic cable. So the only thing that's there is just Spanish programs, and I hated it. Hated staying at my grandparents' house for like, oh my god. But I had to do something to like relieve my time, so like literally had like paper pad, and then I started drawing. And after that, man, it's like the rest is history.
Yeah.
But other than that, like my grandparents like lived a long time. Like literally, like my grandmother passed away like 2 years ago, and she passed away like, I believe, either 92 or 94. And it was like the same age as my grandfather passed away, and he passed away in 2014. So like, trust me, man. Like I feel you. It's like I'm very close to my grandparents. And just hearing their stories is like, wow.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things. Like I was talking about the whole idea about, you know, framing your past, and like taking what you know and what you've experienced and turning that into art. And I think it's so important. I think it's just really important. And so I'm tickled as punch to hear about the JRPG and kind of the background story to all of that. And I think that's it's going to be fun. I can tell you got a lot of fun built into it. So I'm excited to see what you do with that.
Yeah, no, Cassidy is so awesome. It's like, I remember like he did like a tease on his Twitter. It's like, oh, I'm going to watch like TMNT episodes. And then I remember I commented like with a GIF of like one of the, like, it was like one of the newer shows of Nickelodeon has. And, like there's just pretty much a GIF where all 3 of the turtles start looking at Raphael, and like Raphael's just sweating. It's like, oh my god. But yeah, no, Cassidy Blonde is like the bomb. But I can't even talk because that's how excited I am.
No, but,
but he's a talent, man.
He is. He really is. And one of the things I really like about him is that like he pulls off something that I cannot do, which is he's very opinionated, and he doesn't feel the need to like explain that.
Yeah.
He'll like, this is my opinion, and he's just like, people like call him on. He's just like, I don't care what you think. And I have that level of confidence, but I'm a fighter, so I always get down into the dirt, man. That's just about how I'm built. And so that's one of the differences. But I really respect his whole rhetoric. I think it's smart. And he just his first passion is for stories. And I really respect that.
Yeah.
Well, man, it is almost 9:30. I have not had supper. Because it wasn't ready when the show started, and the show started. So that's okay. It's not a big deal. I don't care.
Okay.
So it's not unusual for me on a Thursday to not eat until 10, but it's 9:30 and I'm going to go eat. So thank you, Ichthys, for coming on, and I'm excited to see the JRPG. And for those of you guys who stuck around in the chat, in a matter of maybe a month or so, there may be another announcement from Ichthys that we won't talk about right now.
Yeah, I was gonna like, put it in our private chat, but since you said it,
it's hush hush. Okay, but we're gonna call it the show, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Star, I'm super glad to have seen you. Give everybody at your house love, because I know that they need it. Because everybody needs a little love, especially those little little babies. So, side note, got to talk about this. My boys are about to be 19 and 17.
Wow, congrats!
So it's within a decade. Within a decade, I'm going to be granddad, and I'm so excited.
That's awesome.
Because I miss those little babies so much. I'm not sad that they're grown up. I'm glad my boys are grown. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of them. But I'm nearly ready for them to start bringing babies back, so I can visit with the babies. I love being a dad of the little ones,
Mm-hmm.
and I cannot wait to be a grandfather.
That's all. I can't wait for you to be a grandfather too, so that way you bring like your babies in your live stream.
Oh yeah, the thing I told somebody that what I want to do for retirement is I just want to be covered in grandchildren. It's I want them to come over and just crawl all over me.
Okay.
So.
Oh, Matt, I gotta tell you before you end the show.
Okay.
It's so funny because with with my title of the name, like JRPG, it's like I had a feeling something's about to go down in Twitter, and surely it has. So, I recently got like 2 follows. One was like a live streamer who plays a Japanese role-playing game.
Yeah.
And another one is like, it had like a cool title name. So I'm like, oh shoot, it's like maybe it's a comic creator. Nope. It's a JRPG game.
Yep. It's a whole genre, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I had my buddy Chris who helped me. We co-created the Ideal Comics universe, and he went through a phase where like that's all he played for like 6 months was JRPGs.
Oh my god! Wow.
Yeah. He loves video game RPGs, and like Final Fantasy and all that kind of stuff. But he went through one where it's just imports for like 6 months. I was like,
oh my
god, okay. Not my kind of. I prefer my role-playing games to have dice and tables. Right. That's what I like. Oh, here. Final words. Neo says, "What isn't going down in Twitter?" That's a good point. I'm not gonna answer that question. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, guys, have a good one. Oh, before I hit that end broadcast button, I don't have next week's show scheduled.
Oh,
no guests.
Mic night.
What I want to do actually, and I need to get this out there. I want to have an open mic night of people that don't make comics, just fans.
Oh shoot!
Yeah, I want to get a fan show about people to talk about what they like about comics, indies, pros, whatever, what they're looking for, and I want to have that conversation next week.
Okay.
So if you guys are in the chat, that sounds. I know. Neo and Star. I know you guys both make comics, so you can't come. But you should come in the chat. But that's what I'd like to do next week. And if I can get 2 or 3 people that are just fans to commit, then that's gonna be the plan. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Hold on. I know someone who can be your guest. Hold on. There you go. Your new guest.
Oh, hi, Mr. Kent.
Hello.
You can't fool me like that, Ictus. Come on. Okay. We're going to call it. Good night, everybody.
Good night, I guess.